Hi, I'm Mellisa Smith.
I'm Spencer Ziegler, and welcome to Data Lit, a podcast for educators by educators. And we're going to start today's show with a question. So, Mellisa, I'm going to ask you and the listeners at the same time. So when I ask this, close your eyes, envision the answer, unless they're driving. There's a morning commute.
Right.
Please do not close your eyes.
Or any kind of commute. Don't.
Yep. Be safe. Be safe.
Right.
But okay. What is the most engaging assessment that you can recall?
So I remember a home ec class, home economics class that we had to do. And the task was we had to make a cake.
Make a cake.
Without the use of eggs.
Ooh.
And
interesting.
So the teacher's intent, after we did all of this, was to help us understand that baking is a science, cooking is an art. But when we were doing that, so you guys have to imagine, this was 80s, in the 80s. I know it's going to date me. So this is before, like people are probably, well, that's not too, you can just, so we didn't have Google.
Right.
We didn't have, literally what we had to do was if any of us in the group were bakers, we might have known, but we were literally going to talk to our parents, like our moms, or the bakers in our family, to kind of get some ideas about what we could do.
Okay.
So there was a lot of trial and error trying to fudge the recipe,
right,
to see what do you need to do more of or less than. And in my group, I think we figured out that if you use, I think it's baking powder and oil.
Really?
Yes, can be a substitute for eggs. But again, the recipe already had baking powder in it.
Then you have to think critically to figure out how do you
much,
adjust
right?
those.
Because,
it's not just...
So there was a lot of trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
You're not making big cakes. And this might actually come in handy with the price of eggs right now. But yeah, it was, having to think critically about what we were trying to do. Again, if the expertise wasn't amongst us in the groups, and it wasn't, seeking out parents, grandparents, that kind of thing to get information, and then kind of using that to kind of tweak and figure out to come up with a cake that was edible. Because, at the end of the day,
that's useful in cakes.
Yes.
Most of the time,
it was a cake that you wanted your teacher to be like, oh my gosh, this is really good. Right. So, and that was the assessment. What about you?
Okay. So I remember, I know it was social studies, maybe early middle school, an end of year assessment. And our task was to design an island, like create our own culture. So we were pulling from all these different units throughout. We had to figure out the geography, and then like the 5 themes. We had to design the culture for that community. We had to figure out the financial system, all those kind of things, and then create some kind of map and visual representation of this place. And this was a group project, and then pitch it to the class, say move to our island. So there's a persuasive element.
Yeah. Okay.
So both of these, you can kind of see where we're going, especially if they read the title for this episode. So each of these, we're saying what's the most engaging, what sticks out. And it seems like the 4 C's are running through each of these assessments, right?
Right. None of us said, oh, I remember this really cool multiple choice test that I took.
Yeah. In both, we were making a thing.
Yes.
But not in a paint by numbers kind of way. We had to think critically for how to do that. And that involved collaborating with others and communicating with others, and also communicating the project, to
and thinking
others.
about the content that you already knew and then how to apply it. I think that's kind of the thing that I liked a lot when I think of, projects like that and others. It was things where, all right, so you're giving me all of this content, and I know I have to be in school to learn this content, but then to see the application piece of it, that always stuck with me, that baking is a science and how I approach it.
Right.
That stuck with me more than anything else, right? As opposed to, telling me about different kinds of things. So just that application piece, I think, really makes the content relevant, which is what we want our kids to get.
Yeah, and I suppose each of these assignments we chose, it wasn't just a fun, we probably had assignments at certain points that were fun and frivolous and not really connected to the standards, but neither of us really chose that.
Right.
Both of our assessments that stick out in our memory were great ways to attack the standards.
Yes.
That happen to use the 4 C's.
Correct.
And that's what we're going to explore in this episode, continuing the series on the 4 C's. We're going to look at what does the 4Cs look like inside the classroom?
Yeah.
When it's embedded into assignments and instruction, and essentially performance assessment is what we're going to talk about a lot. And for this, we had the privilege to chat with some students at Wake STEM Early College High School and ask them, what does it look like when you're using the 4Cs in the assignments?
Yeah.
So I'm excited to hear from them. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a few different projects that they were assigned, and ways in which they used the 4Cs throughout, got feedback on them, and grew in those areas, as well as the standards that were the primary purpose of these assignments.
Right.
And chat about them each, one by one. So let's start with a really interesting map project. So let's hear from the students about what this entailed.
The project focused on the megaregion of between Charlotte to Atlanta, known as Charlanta, and seeing what problems could come up there in the future as the population grows and how we could address those problems.
Okay, so Charlanta, new term for me. Wasn't
Yes.
familiar with that. Yeah.
I'm excited to see what that region is like. And I was just like, yeah, that makes sense. And it's like, wait a minute. North Carolina, South Carolina, then Georgia. Like, how big is this region?
Stretches. Okay. So anyway, they were looking at real data, and getting a sense of kind of what's going on as these two metropolitan areas start to kind of merge. And they had then some choice in what area to focus on, what problem to address. So some focused on traffic, some economic disparities, some land use and zoning, some pollution, and so on and so forth.
Right.
But then they put together a product using GIS software, more on that next episode actually, to visualize and communicate why this might be a problem and how it might be addressed. So yeah, what were your thoughts on this assessment?
So one of the things I liked about what they spoke about is it seemed as though they're using the content, the math, the language arts, the everyday things that we know that they have to learn.
Yeah.
But then having to now do, okay, how am I going to apply this? And they all seemed really excited about having agency in, okay, here's the situation, two metropolitan areas. Using what you know about metropolitan areas, what are some problems? So they can choose any problem that sort of resonates with them and then figure out, okay, I am really curious about pollution. Yeah, pollution is going to be a big thing in a metropolitan area. How can I work to solve that or come up with a creative solution to do that? And so each student got their own agency, got some agency into how they can see or visualize it, or come up with a problem and then, come up with solutions to do that. So I thought that was really interesting. And again, the level of engagement that they expressed was phenomenal.
Yeah, we did not need to prod them to get them to gush about this assignment, or we didn't even really need to push them to think about how the 4Cs were embedded throughout. We just kind of hit record and said, tell us about this project.
Right.
I think that says something about the engagement, not just engagement for the sake of engagement, but their engagement with the standards that they were showing through this.
And I like too how I think a lot of the students talked about our young people want to be involved in real world situations. So let's listen to a clip where they spoke about their involvement.
So these aren't just made up problems that we think are going to happen. These problems will happen.
Yeah, I love that. This is not a hypothetical assignment. This isn't do a thing, turn it into the teacher to put a symbolic number on and pass it back. This has them engaging. This goes back to Jay McTighe's elements of strong performance assessments. Authentic problems that mean something to them.
And you can see and hear the excitement. And again, they don't want to be involved in sort of frivolous things, right? We're excited about, even though Charlanta of itself doesn't quite exist, the problems are still real, right? We have a lot of metropolitan areas that are growing and spreading. And the fact that they have to come up with, as citizens of the world, if we allow these things to happen, what are some challenges? And as a young person, how can you contribute to the solutions for those? I think they were super engaged. And then to see the relevance of what they're learning and how to use what they're learning in their classes to respond to the task.
Yeah, well said, well said. So yeah, so they walked through, they're making a map. They had to think critically about what data was relevant, what was not. They had to collaborate, and they were talking about how they were helping each other out with some like the technical skills, and learning the software. And then they had to communicate it to audiences to say like, hey, this is why you should care about it. This is why we should act now. So it's not a problem down the road.
Right.
So each of the 4 C's were shown up there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So another idea that we heard was from a student talking about how they were able to apply critical thinking and creativity in a math and art project. So let's listen to that one.
Like for example, I have a project right now. I'm taking honors pre-calculus, and our project is creating an art piece using polar graphs, because we've been learning about polar graphs. And even though that project doesn't necessarily relate to what we're doing right now, because we've been learning more about vectors, it's also still polar graphs, which was our last unit, and is still related to what our exam's going to be on. So it's still, a lot of it is still, if not directly taught through the projects, because we do still have like normal lessons where they'll teach us how to do the math.
Right.
We implement it more in a project so that we can help remember it and know how to use it in a real situation.
So this is one that really warmed my heart because it was a math example. And so for this one, the kids they're in a pre-cal class, and they have learned about trig functions, namely polar graphs. And I mean, we've all done lessons like that for a pre-cal class. But one way to kind of remember what functions result in what graph, what better way than to integrate or have them have to design artwork to then show, again, creatively how they're thinking about the math, because you have to know the math, and, tying in the art. And so at first I was thinking, oh, this might be a little bit difficult because, again, what if I'm not an art student? Like I'm not, art inclined is the word. So every student can engage in an activity like this because they're using a tool, they might be using Desmos to create it. But then, so that takes away that piece. But again, having to know the different graph types and where you want to land, like what your design looks like, they have to kind of combine those two things. And that helps you remember. I mean, when I had to do this, I just kind of had to learn it, so okay, this function will give me this. Yeah. But then by having to tie it in and to create something, what better way to do that than to, integrate some critical thinking and, some creativity.
Yeah. And I love the interdisciplinary nature of this.
Yeah.
And I think any assignment that's going to incorporate the 4 C's is going to really lend itself well to interdisciplinary. And one of the things hearing you talk about it is just, there are some kids that might have some anxiety about making art, but maybe they're skilled in math. You're able to lean on that kind of math skill to say like, no, you already have the skills to kind of do this, or vice versa. Some kids that might be more artistic, but maybe they have some anxieties around math.
Right.
That awful quote, I am not a math person, No, you are. And we can lean on what you can do in art and your eye for design to kind of put something together there. So I love that interdisciplinary nature that showed up in really all of these assignments that they talked about.
Yeah.
I also, like how they stressed just, this is not an extra thing. Doing the 4 C's is not like, something apart from the standards.
Right.
Like the student was talking about like, this is preparing them for the exams because it's a great way to climb Bloom's ladder and really grapple with the standards in a profound way. And also it reminded me of that assessment as learning, because they're kind of grappling with the ideas as they're creating this product. So not assessment for learning, not assessment of learning, but this kind of beautiful mixture of the two.
Because eventually, as she said, she does have a test that she has to prepare for, which would be your assessment of learning. But what an interesting and unique way to sort of give them some feedback.
Yeah.
As they're learning about, these trig functions before they get to the major test.
Yeah, and I think that's important to note when you're talking about, so we're talking about a lot of performance assessments, which is one of the 4 assessment methods. Assessment items can come in the form of selective response or extended response or personal communication or performance assessment.
Right.
And as we talked about in, I think this was season 1 episode, we can drop in the show notes.
Yeah.
It's not better or worse. It's where they can play a role within either a larger assessment or within an instructional unit. So you can kind of see how a performance assessment as maybe assessment as learning throughout a unit can help them prepare for maybe a more standard summative assessment that's going to incorporate more of the selective response.
And again, so for a lot of these things, and I know for me as a math student, I struggle with having to memorize all of these things.
Yeah.
I think attacking it this way lessens the load on having to memorize it because, again, I'm doing that application piece. So you can better remember what is it that you're trying to learn because it makes sense. You know?
Right. And because the brain is not an empty vessel that you just pour knowledge in. Like the things, going back to the beginning of this, the things that we talked about, assignments that we remember, and probably listeners, were things that were novel and authentic. And that can be just as good of a way to memorize certain kind of foundational skills as the still value, but the like kind of flashcard model.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. So I thought that was a good assignment. Let's jump over to a different subject to get another example of what the 4 C's might look like embedded in an assessment.
Right now in civics class, the project that our teacher told us is research a civil issue in the United States today and just make a documentary about it. So all of us have gone different directions, and we're contacting people outside of school, gathering interviews for this. It's a lot more freedom to be able to creatively think and then collaborate with people within the school and out of school to be able to improve our project.
All right, so now, we're in that civics realm, that social studies, the history. What were your thoughts on this assessment?
All right, so the biggest thing I heard is freedom. So if you know me, I'm a person where music is a big part of my life. So I'm thinking of George Michael's song, Freedom.
Yeah, great.
But I think, again, it's important for these 4 C's because I think when done right, it gives them that freedom to make choices for themselves. And that's what they want to be able to do, right? Like any adult or any human being, we don't always want to be told what to do. We want to be able to okay, I get some information. Now I want the freedom to be able to apply that information and make it make sense to me and in my world. And so it was really refreshing to hear that when you use the 4 C's well, it gives students some agency. And then what better way to see if students really understand that by giving them the agency? Okay, go ahead and pick a problem and make a documentary around it. And then they have to figure out, okay, the end result is a documentary on the civics issue. What are all of the steps that I have to go in? So this was a really nice mix of having to pull all of the 4 C's into having to get this task done.
Yeah, and the communication stood out to me here. One, just the product is a form of communication.
Right.
But also, when the students were talking about this, they're chatting about just the different people they had to communicate with in order to kind of learn what they needed to learn and put this together. And that popped up a few. There was another time when a kid was talking about emails. I think they were working for the Y or something like that. And they talked about how they learned that you communicate differently based on the medium and the recipient and their tone. They're modulating it's different whether they're talking to students at the Y versus their supervisor at the Y, and that kind of came up here. So you have, I think, these kind of assignments. They're a great way of hitting the standards. Are also a great way of teaching some really real world skills.
Because can you imagine that in your ELA class, right? You are learning about tone.
Yeah.
But I think for the students, it sounded as though that didn't resonate until, right? I have to communicate with somebody, and what does tone look like or sound like in order to communicate your point?
Yeah, right. And that is even hitting some of the ELA standards that this probably wasn't even designed necessarily to do, but just naturally, organically, a strong assessment that's incorporating the 4 C's is going to break down those barriers. And I think that's really helpful for that kind of dreaded question, why do we need to learn this? What do I get out of this?
Yes.
It's much easier to kind of have that be self-evident if those 4 walls of the classroom are kind of breaking down and you're seeing how it's connecting subject to subject, but even outside of that.
Right.
Yeah. So those are some assignments, but also these assessments began to kind of build upon themselves. And it was interesting to hear kids talk about when they get to the senior year, what some of this might look like.
Yeah, so this is another example, I think, where we hear them talk about agency again.
Yep. Let's hear it.
So at the end of our high school career, a way that we have like been able to apply or see how we like focused on the 4Cs is a way outside of school is through an internship that we have to do at the senior end of our like high school career.
Everyone has to do it.
Everyone has to do it. So
Interesting.
I actually did one last summer, and I was able to take the course that the seniors take, which is based off of the 4Cs. And actually, for a couple of assignments, you have to reflect on how you built your creativity, communication, critical thinking, and collaboration in many different ways outside of school and with actual people in the workforce. So there were like Google Forms that you had to evaluate yourself with. You had to provide specific examples by building journal entries, by building this portfolio, which shows how you've basically like improved yourself with the 4Cs.
So one of the key things that struck me with this one is self-reflection. And we have spoken in previous episodes, I think it's around assessment of and the assessment for learning, is that the thing that makes assessment for learning impactful is the ability to have students involved.
Yep.
And one way to do that is through having them self-reflect about their learning. And I think this was so evident in this piece that the student talked about, in that they learn about themselves when they are required to kind of sit and think about how are you integrating or developing in these areas.
Yeah. And that, because I like that this one touched upon what we raised last episode of just how do you measure the 4Cs?
Yep.
And this kind of gave you a number of ways to do so. So that self-reflection is key, that Google form, and then feedback that comes from there. They'd mentioned journaling, a portfolio.
Yeah.
So you can kind of see here that metacognition and where students are getting their feedback on their 4Cs so they can grow. Because it's one thing to have opportunities to show the 4Cs, but the next step is, okay,
Getting
you need
that feedback.
actional, feedback to kind of do that. And then also with some like the Google Forms, some of those perhaps calibrated rubric, like ones we'll have in the show notes, teachers then can have some data so they can reflect on their practice. So they can think of, just as the same way they might want to look at, some other standards about, okay, how can I improve upon this in the next unit, the next year? They can do so with the 4Cs, which I think is key.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important because the 4Cs are already there. That's something that kind of struck us. We've been talking to students throughout, they're in our curricula if you look through. So students are making stuff, students are collaborating. The question is how you can do it intentionally and explicitly to get that growth. And that's where you have those kind of measurement piece, the feedback piece.
Yeah, I agree with that one.
Yeah. Okay. And then somewhat related, I liked hearing from students talking about I think get recognition in a sense of how they've improved. So let's hear students talk about that.
Okay.
We get these awards at the end of the year, essentially, depending on how you've done in classes, and there's overall grade level ones, and some of those are based on the 4Cs as well.
I mean, kind of going along with the awards thing, each person will get an award based on one of the 4Cs, how the teachers think that they did. Like, somebody would get, like, if they were collaborating really well with their classmates in projects, they would be able to get an award. Or, I mean, in any of our projects, we use the 4Cs subconsciously, and then kind of afterwards we can see how we use the 4Cs. Just like, oh, in this part of the project, I just did this automatically, like subconsciously. I was like, use communication in this part or critical thinking, and then afterwards we can look back on it and then realize like, oh, this is when I used one of these.
So one of the things I really, really, really liked hearing is that this practice of having, for want of a better word, 4Cs awards, allow for the students to show their strengths in different ways, right?
Yeah.
And so it seemed, we talk about this moving from deficit thinking to asset-based thinking. This seems like a way to do that, right? Because everybody can be valued in their ways that they show either any of the 4Cs, right? And so it seems more open-ended in terms of, oh, it's award season time. I'm not going to get one because I'm not quote unquote academic. This allows for a student to be seen, because we all have within us, creativity, collaboration, communication, critical thinking.
Yeah.
And so we all have value.
Right. I love that asset-based kind of approach. And there's benefit, think back to some of our conversations on grading. There's a lot of benefit in hitting standards like the 4 Cs in a way that is separate from those big general grading schemes. And I think these awards can kind of get at that because they can tease out certain parts, you know. And this also kind of, so this felt very, going back to that assessment types, the, formative, interim, summative kind of thing. This was a good example of some really authentic and useful kind of summative kind of a feedback there. But also reminded me, throughout all these conversations, the importance of also getting that formative feedback as you're going through.
Yeah.
The interim feedback at certain benchmarks. And just like with other standards, by incorporating all of them, you can have a balanced approach to the 4 Cs.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. So those were a number of different assignments and ways in which students were able to show what they know with the 4 Cs and get some feedback there. So let's take a step back and think about what did we learn about embedding the 4 Cs into instruction and assessment. So Mellisa, what stands out to you?
So I think one of the main things for me was a way that the 4 Cs or these projects or these strategies allow the students to build community by recognizing each other's strengths. So let's listen to this clip, I think, that will highlight that point.
I think also in the critical thinking part, the collaboration also comes in part. You're asking for like help and stuff for something that you don't know, but like the environment that we have at STEM is like if we don't know something, there's almost guaranteed somebody else in our grade that will know how to do it. So you can collaborate with those people, learn how to do it, and everyone kind of builds each other up and be able to learn more effectively.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. And it's a reminder, it's something that we've talked about kind of off air throughout, this point for the series. We talked to students for a few hours. We have a lot of footage for this. That one thing that stands out is collaboration is more than just moving your desk from rows to groups.
Yes.
And there's an example of when you have authentic assessments that mean something for kids, it's going to result in some more rich collaboration.
I like how the tasks are open-ended enough where the students have to sort of figure out and learn how to ask for help. I think that is a pretty key skill that we need. And so I love that they recognize that. I don't think their teachers come to say, we're setting this up so that I think over time, because, they're doing this in all of their grades, in all different subjects, that they're seeing that this is a really important skill for us to have. And, and we talk to a mixture of students, some more shy than others, but they're all seeing that it is important to ask for help. Everybody doesn't know everything. And how do you identify the skills in each other and then grow together? And so I love that part of it.
Yeah, and that goes back to that asset base. The collaboration is more than just everybody gets divvied up 20% of the work. It's knowing, this student's great with graphic design. So like, hey, can you help me out with this piece that's going to go on the project? Or this student maybe is more extroverted. Can you help me out with, delivering it? Whatever it might be, figuring out that profile for each. That's true collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah. And something that there's a quick phrase that popped out that really stood out to me as another value for embedding the 4 Cs. So let's hear this.
Okay.
The 4 Cs are skills like any other skills, like riding a bike, cooking. You get better at them by practicing.
And that's beautiful. That encapsulation of, I think, this whole series.
Or just education, right? With anything, with any learning, you get better, right? It's very rare that the first time you learn something, you can master it. And so I think this gives us grace as we are proposing new ideas and a new way of thinking and engaging young people that, again, start small, give yourself grace, but keep at it. Like it may not be perfect the first time, but as the student just says, we get better by practicing. So not only the students get better, but we as teachers get better by
true.
continuing to practice integrating this. So to me, this was an invitation to don't give up the first time you try any of these sort of things. Like continue to see what you learn, reflect, just like how the students are asking to reflect on what went well, what can you be done differently, and continue to do this because this is what they're asking us for.
Yeah, it's that kind of Carol Dweck moving from a fixed mindset to growth mindset.
Yes.
And I think sometimes, I don't know, when you talk about stuff like creativity, it's easier to slide back into that someone either this binary is or is not creative. But like any other skill, get better by practicing.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it. So can you give me one more thing that stands out in terms of the 4 C's inside the classroom?
Yeah, I think there was this one more thing about the reason why we're doing all of this, and it sort of ties back about in our first episode about making schools worth their while. And so the students said something so poignant. So let's listen to what they said.
I definitely think that can be what makes learning fun, right? When you don't know what the outcome's going to be, when you don't know, learning something new and actually being able to make a point and prove that point and persuade other people that this is an issue, this is a problem, is something that I think intrigues me a lot in learning and makes it more exciting for me to kind of dive into that.
So out of the mouths of babes, you just heard it, right? Yeah. Our children have an innate curiosity and imagination. And, you know, we do this because it just makes it fun.
Yeah.
Now, I know when I was growing up, I don't think I equated learning and fun together. But I think enough research has shown that you can learn something when you can make a connection, when you can help answer a problem or help it make sense to you.
Yeah.
That is fun. I think we have to stretch our definition of fun.
Right.
And so, as the student said, when we integrate the 4 C's or give them agency and voice and allow them to apply the things that they're learning, that is fun.
Yeah, I love it. And all these assignments that students talked about were standards based.
Yes.
They were hitting the standards. The 4 C's this wasn't an extra like, oh, we have a half day, we got to fill some time. Let's do a 4 C's activity.
Correct.
These were math activities, these were social studies activities, and so on and so forth that happened to include the 4 C's as kind of a force multiplier to make it more authentic and rich and personable and give them autonomy and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that was hearing from students at Wake STEM about what the 4 C's look like inside the classroom, things that were assigned by teachers. In the next episode, we're going to move to outside the classroom and start looking at some like extracurricular opportunities.
Okay.
Instead of a school event, a civic event at GIS Day. So you're going to get some different clips from students from all throughout the county for that one. I'm excited for it.
Me too.
Yeah. If you have any thoughts on this or any other topics, feel free to go to our website at www.wcpss.net/datalit, or you can email us at datalit@wcpss.net. Huge thank you to all the students at Wake STEM for chatting with us. Thank you to Leesville Road High School's Will McElarney for the beautiful, beautiful theme song. Thank you to you, Mellisa, for chatting with me about the 4 C's.
As always, it has been my pleasure. And thank you for engaging.
Yeah, thank you to our listeners for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.
Bye.